Welcome to the Album Anniversary Podcast. Today's show is about Drawing Black Lines by Project 86. It was released March 21st, 2000, so it is celebrating a 25-year anniversary. Hi, I'm your host, Caleb, or Caleb the Spy on social media. Every day on social media, I do post about what I call album anniversaries. So on the Album Anniversary Podcast, we take a look at a classic album, an album we love, or an album that's important to us on the anniversary of its release date. Albums on the show often focus on alternative rock, punk, and my strange obsession with ska. In the 90s, I was super into the Christian music scene, so that does come up often on the show. Today, I'm joined by Rob and our resident Project 86 expert, Aaron, to talk about Drawing Black Lines by Project 86. Gentlemen, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us back.
Yeah, super excited to have you guys back here. This is an album that I know is super, super important to people. Like, this album is a big deal. People love this album. So I was excited to have you guys back on the show, somebody to talk about it. And so, before we jump into the album, I kind of wanted to talk about like that idea of, I know you guys have been to concerts and that sort of thing. And I'm trying to think of like, what's the first concert that you guys remember where it wasn't just your mom and dad brought you, but like, or your youth group brought you, but like you chose it. You were like, this is something I want to see. And then you were like, I want to go see this band, and you made it to that show. And Robert, you're smiling. Has this never happened to you? Have you never been to a show?
Okay, so no, I mean I've been to shows. I'm not a big concert guy, mostly just because I can't afford them.
Sure.
So like my first concert was one that I got brought to by the youth group, and that was Carmen.
Okay.
I wasn't like super into it, but it was cool. It was a fun atmosphere. So shortly after that, there was an advertisement I heard on the radio station for a Christian music festival, air quotes there. It was really just like a one-day thing. It was in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. If it's kind of a nothing place in Arkansas. Sure. But anyways, it was cool. I kind of drug my youth group to go do that because I was the hard rock guy. Like nobody else in my youth group was into that stuff. And but I was like really, really excited to do this. And I knew that was like the only way I was going to get to go. So I talked them all into going. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of them. They're not a huge group, but GS Megaphone. Mm-hmm. They were semi-local, but they were kind of pushing the bigger leagues a little bit. They never really broke out, but pretty good band, decent stuff. But they were kind of like the host band, I guess you'd say. And I don't even remember who was headlining the first year. But I remember the second year, it was Skillet, okay. And that was during their Alien Youth tour. So that was fun. That was a good concert. So yeah, that'd probably be the one for me.
Cool. Aaron, how about you?
I don't know exactly what my first one would be. I know it would be a similar general idea of like mid-late 90s youth group stuff. I remember, going to see DC Talk and Audio Adrenaline, the Newsboys, those big three coming through.
Yeah.
I was a big fan of Bleach, so if I had a chance to see them or for something, I did that one. But something kind of funny relating to this and talking about, your own conscious choice to go to a show, but also being dropped off, because this was happening before I had a driver's license I could take myself. To this day, I don't know how it worked, but there's a concert club in Sauget, Illinois called Pops. And Sauget, Illinois is just over the river outside of St. Louis. And it's a place you don't really want to be going and hanging out at. The club is located between two strip clubs, or was at the time. Somehow, me and like two other friends who were also getting into Project 86 and type of music like that at the time, more than once got our parents to take us over to Pops and drop us off to see shows there, and then came back and picked us up. I don't know what they did during the meantime, and I don't know why they let us go to these shows in that area, but I have no explanation. But I'm pretty positive that Project was one of them, somewhere around probably the time that this album came out. And so I have fond memories of seeing them and POD and Seven Dust and some of that stuff that was coming out around that time. As like a 16, 17-year-old, I'm like, I don't know how this is happening, but I'm not going to complain.
Yeah,
That's cool.
That's pretty amazing. That's some good parental trust there to be like, no, you're
guess.
good kids, or maybe they just missed it. I mean, just didn't understand what was going on. Oh, that's pretty hilarious.
I think it was a combination. I think they were like, you guys are trustworthy enough, we think. Um, and also being a little oblivious. I don't think they understood the sort of sketchiness of where we were.
That's hilarious. Oh, well, for me, mine's Christian related too. I remember our youth group went to see the Newsboys, and then our youth pastor took us to see Steve Taylor with Guardian opening for him, which is pretty. It was only a couple of us who really wanted to go, but I remember my youth pastor taking him. It wasn't my parents dropping me off, but I remember the first one that we went to kind of as a bunch of youth group kids without the youth group and without parents was the Prayer Chain. I do remember that distinctly, and it's the only time I ever got to see them. They broke up shortly afterwards, to be totally honest, but we did get to see the Prayer Chain live, which was pretty cool. So that's the first concert I can remember where it was like, we want to go and do this, and it wasn't just kind of a youth group event, or my parents never dragged me to concerts, so that was never a threat. Awesome. Well, I just was thinking about that as we were getting ready for this, so I think with that out of the way, we'll jump in and we'll tackle this album. All right, talking about Drawing Black Lines, again by Project 86, released March 21st, 2000, so a 25-year anniversary. I feel pretty good about that date. Some of these earlier Christian albums, I will say the dates get a little fuzzy, but I feel pretty good about that one. So March 21st, 2000. This is their second record, and it was released on BEC, but then would be reissued with Atlantic branding after they had signed with Atlantic. So second album released on BEC and Atlantic as well.
If you look up the covers of that regular version and then the Atlantic version, they're basically the exact same, except for the Atlantic one's a little bit brighter, and it has their dragon logo they were using at the time slapped on there with the rest. The rest of it is functionally the exact same thing. I thought that was kind of funny.
Okay, so I didn't realize that about the dragon logo, because I was thinking to myself because I anytime I do this kind of stuff, I try to pull out the liner notes and look at it all. And I was thinking I remembered seeing the dragon logo on there, and it's not on mine. So now it's on some of the other parts, but it's not on the actual cover. So yeah, I don't know what that means, but yeah, I remember seeing that on the cover, and I'm not seeing it on the one I have.
So that must mean you have the BEC one. Is that what you have? You have the BEC one, and then the Atlantic one has the.
Like
okay, yeah, because I'm looking at streaming, and it's got the dragon.
Yeah.
So I snagged it before it got really got the backing, huh?
I mean, before it blew up is kind of what it sounds like. Yeah. It was produced by a guy named Garth Richardson, and he goes by it's an interesting name. I'm not gonna lie. He goes by GGG Arth, like it's 3 G's and then it's Garth, but with 3 G's at the beginning. I have no idea what is going on with his name, but his real name's Garth Richardson, and he is the son of Jack Richardson, or Rickardson is probably how you say it, not Richardson. Let's see what I have Rickardson and Richardson. Double checking my notes. Richardson is the name. I have it misspelled here once. And he produced Jack, his father, produced Alice Cooper and kind of some other folks from kind of that time frame. So Apparently producing and engineering is just runs in his family. He has done a ton of engineering work for like the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Nickelback, Motley Crue, and then he has produced a ton. Like this guy's page is huge. If you go to his Wikipedia page, it's almost endless. This is a handful of them that jumped out to me. And there's one that does not feel like the other. There's two that really don't feel like the other ones from the ones I picked off. So Rage Against the Machine, Mudvayne, Melvins, L7, the Voodoo Glow Skulls. That was good pronunciation by me. The Supertones, Chevelle, Spoken, Rise Against, Haste the Day. And then he's done a couple other ones with Project A6. Supertones, you don't belong. I'm just very confused how you fit into this, but there you go.
Which Supertones albums did he do?
He did Chase the Sun, which behind the curtains, we released that. That was released today in 1999. So now you know when we're recording.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. It looks like that's the only Supertones one.
That honestly tracks because to me that's always been the one that kind of lent itself a little bit more towards like the nu metal sound. So it kind of makes sense.
The internet also says that he did some type of production on The Urge's Master of Style. So I need to point that out as a guy from St. Louis, because The Urge is basically St. Louis rock royalty.
Okay.
And so shout out to those guys. As far as his name goes, I can't confirm 100% the validity of this, but I have heard people say it like it sounds like a stutter, like Garth is his name.
Oh, really?
And supposedly it's because he has a stutter, but I can't confirm that as a fact. It's just like the rumor or urban legend or whatever that I've heard before. So it certainly makes him more unique to go by that, for better or worse.
Yeah, I mean he's got a solid career. I mean, it's a little weird here towards the end of his career, the last like 10 years or so, but like there's a spell there where he is producing a lot of big records. I mean, so he's been around the block. He clearly, and clearly family business, it sounds like. So, I mean, he has a spell though where, I mean, just to throw it out there, it looks like he's the producer on Rage Against the Machine's self-titled album. Like if you're going to be the producer on one of those albums, that's the one in my opinion that just cool. Feels like something special. There's something special happened there, whether you like Rage Against the Machine or not. Like something went on there, and so like that's pretty cool. That's to have that in your discography.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they kind of bottled magic there. We talked about that last time. How they just kind of came in and it sounded like a fully formed band just right out of the gate.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so that is a good one.
Yep. This did chart okay, I guess. It peaked at number 37 on the Heat Seekers, which I don't understand how that works. And then I think sales on this were pretty good. Obviously, with Atlantic backing it, I think it probably helped as well. And I mean, that was the whole idea, is right? Their debut hits, and what's the song? The Pile. So there's a song off that first one that becomes like kind of a Pipe Dream. Thank you. Yeah. That becomes kind of a big hit, and that gets Atlantic's attention. And then I think this did pretty good, though. I don't think it was like crazy. It's not like a multi-platinum selling album, but for an album that started on BEC and then went over to Atlantic, I think it sold pretty well. Again, 37 on the Heat Seekers. That's pretty good. I don't know how the Heat Seekers works, but it's the only official chart thing I could find on this album. There's probably some website I need to tap into that goes into it. So I think it did okay. And then it was released to, especially on the Christian sites, like the reviews on this are incredibly positive. So here's just a couple of them. All Music gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and I know they're not a Christian site. College Music Journal, which I don't know what that is. I guess they just do positive. Maybe they do positive, neutral, and negative. They just gave it a positive. So good on you. And then Cross Rhythm gave it 9 out of 10. And then Jesus Freak Hideout gave it a 5 out of 5. So I think overwhelmingly positive reviews from the ones I could find. And I think even the Jesus Freak Hideout one, I read it and I was like, I don't even really like this style of music. And he still gave it a 5 out of 5. So says something for what it did for people.
Yeah, I think it's generally just a objectively good album that I really think too, like it lends itself, if you were to tell somebody like, hey, get into Project 86, it'd be the one to start with. It's very accessible.
Yeah.
So one thing you mentioned, Pipe Dream, that song was kind of the catalyst for this album. Basically, when they released their self-titled album, that was the only song that took off. And so when they went to write this album, they said, we need to kind of lean into that. And you can tell that they did. And from there, you can tell with One Armed Man, which was kind of the standout track from this album, you can tell that's kind of the sound they leaned into for Truthless Heroes as well. So I think that's kind of a fun thing about them, is that, they kind of saw what people enjoyed and they tried to lean into it.
Yeah, cool.
You mentioned, I think we can get into this more in a little bit here, but you mentioned Rage Against the Machine earlier, and if you listen sonically to their first album, you could tell that they were one of those bands that was coming out that was kind of trying to ape that sound a little bit. He doesn't rap quite in the way that like Zach does, but he kind of shouts at you. And but musically, they had a lot of Rage vibes, and by this album, it started to feel like they were figuring out kind of their own sound and identity, rather than just what they, I guess, thought they should sound like, or who they were influenced by, and that kind of thing.
Well, let's dive into our first question then. So, how is it that you guys first discovered this album?
So, I don't remember if I think I probably told this story the last time that I was on, and we talked about a different project album. We talked about Songs to Burn Your Bridges by, I believe. But at 10th grade, I don't know exactly the pattern that led me to it, but somehow I had come across Project. I was listening to that self-titled album. I met a guy at the new school I was going to, who was getting big into POD. We traded albums and both became fans of the other. And so that was kind of our bonding experience. And then those two bands have always had like a perpetual kind of connection to me. So I was already, into Project by the time this album came out. And then, like I said, this one, 2000 or so, I'm in, 10th, 11th grade, whatever. And it really solidified that fandom, where it was like, this is really what I'm feeling at the time. It struck kind of where I was at, I think, spiritually and what I was looking for sonically, which was just something harsher than kind of what I had grown up on.
So you had already been into them, and it kind of was just like, here's the next step.
Yeah, I think I just discovered them the same way you do anybody the album, the same way you do anybody you've already been into. Is like, oh, hey, that band I like is releasing something new. Let's check it out. So
exactly. Awesome. Rob, how about you? What's your introduction to this album?
Okay, so my introduction to this album starts with my introduction to their self-titled album. Because
see, it feels like a really similar story coming up.
So no, actually, I heard Pipe Dream on like a skate video, I think it was, and I was like, oh, cool, I really like this song. And anyways, I became interested in the band. I couldn't find their self-titled album anywhere, and little Christian bookstore there in it wasn't my hometown, but it was the town where my mom worked. I'd go to work with her, and I'd go over to the Christian bookstore and listen to CDs, And one particular day, I saw this album on the shelf, and I was like, "Oh, yeah, they've got a new album, so I got to listen to this." And so I popped it in, and like I don't even think I got like 2 or 3 songs in, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm buying this." So yeah, that it was one of those that I kind of stumbled onto, and I was really, really happy that I did.
Awesome. I'm trying to think if there's any band that I've been introduced to by like a skate video or a video game. Because I know like, Goldfinger's Superman, like they credit Tony Hawk Pro Skater as like basically the reason they all can still do music for a living. I mean, because it's just what it meant to them. And I'm trying to think of anything. I feel like I saw Seasons by Goaty Hook in some Christian video, and then it made like extreme sports Christian video. But I think I already knew of Goaty Hook. I'm trying to think I don't think I have anything like that. That's a really cool introduction to a band, to just see something and be like so taken. Like so taken out by the music that you can't even focus on like what the video is about. You're like, I need to figure out who this music is. That's a pretty cool experience.
You just reminded me of this, and maybe this is where you saw it. You saw that video as well. But there was something that I started watching around that time. It was on like late at night, and I don't even remember what channel, but it was a whole program. It was called G-Rock. That it was like an hour or something, and it was all like this like punk and like hardcore and like heavy, like kind of underground, but like Christian stuff. And it was always these, again, late 90s, 2000, whatever, like, low quality. A lot of it was like skate videos. And so they would put bands like Go to You Hook or Spoken or Project would be on there. And I that Screaming Giant Records is a label that I remember hearing from that time that had a lot of stuff in there. So yeah, that underground stuff. If you look that up, I bet you can find a bunch of old skate punk music videos on that program.
Yeah, G-Rock TV.
Does it still exist? It might
He's
still
got
exist.
he's got a Facebook page, it looks like.
Okay.
And it's not a huge, and maybe it's not the same thing, but it's like sorry, I'm going to have clicking in the background. Sorry, everyone. I'm doing too much research. So it's G-Rock G-Rock TV for 25 years, has partnered with the world's best musicians, surfers, skateboarders, and more, growing into a global youth movement to reflect Christ in ... I can't see the rest of the preview. So I think it sounds similar. I mean, 25 years, that's about right. I mean, it's year 2000. So yeah, I wonder if that's it.
Scrolling through their stuff, they have POD, they have Dogwood. It's like all that kind of stuff that was the Christian punk coming out around that time. So it probably is the same thing. But
Yeah.
that's a cool little memory lane thing to kind of trigger in the memory or in the mind.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yep. The other song on that particular video I remember hearing and really enjoying was Jonah by Grandma Train.
Okay.
Nice.
Both of those were just like big standouts for me that I was like, oh, there's a whole world of Christian music I haven't discovered yet.
I think the people who fell in love with Grandma Train really fell hard. Like, I don't think it's as huge of a following, but I think the people who are like who were into them were like, oh my gosh, they were my favorite band for 5-10 years. I feel like that's their fan base is very much like that.
Yeah.
What is it that you love about this album?
So the main thing that I love about this album is that they really let their bass player stand out. Steve Dale does a fantastic job on this album. I mean, there's so many tracks that, I mean, really the very first track, Stein's Theme, it breaks out with the bass line, and I mean, it's so powerful, so impactful. And then Me Against Me, it really stands out once again. But there was a time, I feel like, where bass players really got to actually show their talent and do some cool things. Whereas now it seems like most of the time they tend more so to fall into the background. So that's my favorite thing about this album, which it may sound like a low bar, but it's really not. There's a lot of things I really love about this album. But as somebody who's played a little bit of bass, like I listened to it and I see what he was doing, and he was having a lot of fun. He was having a ton of fun on this album, you can tell. And they really let him stand out, which is cool to me. And it gives them a bit of a different sound than a lot of the other new metal bands that were going at the time, because most of them were very guitar driven. Randy, the guitar player, I mean, he's got some great stuff on here too, but you can tell it's kind of like he was stepped back a bit. And Steven was really allowed to shine, and I absolutely love the bass work on it. So good.
Nice. Aaron, how about you? How about for you? What's something that stands out on this album for you?
Well, historically, I think something that I think made me gravitate towards it was that it was probably like the harshest thing musically that I had heard to that point. It's very
Hmm.
like dissonant and like uncomfortable sometimes in the different sounds that they come up with.
Hmm.
It's aggressive and like I don't know, it throws you off like the way it's just sonically.
Yeah,
Um, and I totally, agree that it felt unique then and it still feels unique now. If they get lumped into that new metal, or even back then they were still getting lumped into like rap metal. And
Hmm.
Schwab has never been really a rapper. Like I said, he yells at you is really what he does.
yeah,
He now definitely is a screamer, but even at this point, he's more of a yeller. He's definitely never been a singer. Randy is a little bit of a singer, which we can again get into more later. But yeah, like, and I agree. Stephen Dale's bass on this, it's a pro and a con. I think he's fantastic. I think you got Stein's theme, you got Me Against Me leading off. His lines are great. I don't think the mix does him any favors. I think it's a little too like dirty and muddy, and he kind of sometimes gets more buried than he should. Um, but I think his actual playing is
yes,
fantastic and definitely stands out. You
I
can
agree.
tell, yeah, even to this day, you could like Andrew Schwab is Project 86, but you can tell that the other three members of the band were very vital in their success as well. They have not been the same band since these guys ceased to be part of it.
Hmm.
All three of them. Their drummer Alex and Randy the guitarist as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it something about his lyrics too that stand? I mean, are there
Oh
things that
yeah.
stand out about him? Because I've heard he's kind of one of the first, kind of, especially in this heavier side of the Christian space, and that's what this is. It's on BC. I know it went on to be Atlantic. I'm going to call it Christian. Sorry if they don't want to be labeled that, but
Yeah.
I always caveat that. But where he was kind of touching on some more like almost intellectual stuff. Like he seems very. I've heard like he seems very well read, and like so some of this like is also a shift. Like he's on the first album, it's a little more personal, and this one he's a little more kind of like kind of tackling broader topics, but like in a way, is that something that stood out back then, or is that something that about his lyrics? Are there things that stand out about that?
Yeah, I think absolutely.
Yeah, I think that was a big thing. Again, going that gravitating towards what I kind of felt like I was looking for at that time. Looking at some of it now, I think Andrew is kind of, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. He's overwrought. Like he's kind of trying too hard to say big things in big words. Um, but he's also covering some stuff that you didn't hear that much about, or at least I hadn't heard. Like you go to a song like PS is pretty positive that it's about a pornography addiction, at
Hmm.
least in part. And that's some weighty material to be covering, especially at that time period. I don't know, especially in like mainstream Christian-ish music, that was something that was being talked about.
Yeah,
Um, so he was definitely going places and trying to maybe even that's where the rage reference comes in again, where he was trying to like confront some stuff. Um, and so yeah, the lyrics are definitely a piece of the attraction to this album.
yeah. Rob, for you, is there anything on his lyrics?
Yeah. I mean, I can't think of anything specific from this album. Um, like I feel like their self-titled album, he's pretty much the only one who really shines,
Hmm.
Mhm.
um, because of his lyricism. And I've heard them say before that like they just kind of stumbled into the rap rock thing. That wasn't really their goal, but because of his vocal style, that's just where they ended up. But you know, so I guess to me, like you said, Andrew's kind of the band. He's the through line at least. But there's only been one album, and you'll have to forgive me, I can't remember the name of it. There's only been one album that I just didn't really enjoy that much, and it was because his vocals were so different,
Hmm.
um,
Mm.
and it just didn't feel like the band. But he's kind of that anchor, um, for the group, even at this point, I would say, of drawing black lines. I mean, he's what makes it all work,
Hmm.
because he does have some deep thoughts, deep spiritual thoughts that are coming out and coming out strong. He had a different way of saying things.
Hmm.
Like in Stein's theme, not everybody could sing about fungus and it actually be something impactful. That's talking about basically talking about the church, right? And talking about us growing stronger every day. I mean, not everybody could pull that off, but I mean, ultimately, I think Andrew is a poet, and he just takes that poetry and puts it to rhythm. So, yeah, I mean, I think he's a huge standout, but I think he's the standout for every album, honestly.
I think this is something that's kind of important for both of you, but why is it something that's important to you or something that it still holds up?
So as far as why the album's important and why it kind of holds up, it was definitely important in solidifying my fandom of the band and just kind of this direction of music. In terms of a lot of my taste to this day still is stuff that is somewhere in this vicinity. Again, we've talked about it was very relatable to where I was spiritually at the time. And, I wasn't a rebellious teenager, but this was fairly rebellious sounding music nonetheless. And there was still sort of, I feel like any teenager almost is going to have a need for a little bit of that outlet for aggression. And you're questioning a lot of things. And Schwab was definitely doing that in a way that resonated. As far as holding up, I don't know. Again, I still kind of have some issues with the mix, and I think I would be very interested to hear what this album would sound like remastered to be a little more polished. Like if you hear the albums that came after this, even the one we talked about before with Songs to Burn Your Bridges, that little bit of polish, they never became overproduced, but a little bit more polish on them, I feel like makes them sound better and pulls out, I think the elements that they want to have shine a little more. Particularly going back to that bass, that low end. I think it still holds up even for Project, which again at this point is Andrew Schwab and then other people. It's not these guys, and their sonically Project is incredibly different now than they were at this point. But to that point, there's multiple songs from this album that he still includes in set lists, 20 plus years later. That resonate still as fan favorites, even as the band has evolved to being something very different. So, Me Against Me, Stein's Theme, One Armed Man, even PS, like those are still like pretty much staples in their live sets. And so it holds up well enough for me, and it definitely holds up for them as well.
That's interesting because I was looking up something, and there was a rumor in 2020 that they were going to remaster this album, but it doesn't look like it ever happened. So that's really interesting.
I would love to hear that.
Yeah, if you go to their Bandcamp page, which they only have like 2 songs, so I don't know how legit it is. They have a Drawing Black Lines remastered. The only track though is The Spy Hunter, which
is
I'm so confused.
Not from the album. Yeah.
I don't know a ton about Project, and I know that's not right. Like that's so confusing. So I don't know if they were, because I found a YouTube video of this guy talking about it in 2020. Like, hey, is this what they're doing? And he had seen some like trailer video, and so that's what he thought was happening, but doesn't look like it ever happened. I can't find a version of it, so unfortunate. Rob, what about you? For you, why is this something that holds up for you?
Well, and this is not like to be subversive here. I actually really do like the mix on this album. I like. I don't know. Maybe it is the dirtier, grittier stuff. So in order to really talk about why I like this album so much, I kind of have to talk about the next album a little bit. Truthless Heroes kind of undid me as a fan for a moment. To where I was very excited when the album came out and I got it, and it just felt like it wasn't like it was just like not my Project 86, because of Drawing Black Lines being such a staple for me. And there's a lot of interesting history behind Truthless Heroes and why they made the album they did that I won't get into right now. But to me, that one leans toward overproduced. It's not overproduced, but it's to me, it's very close to the line. And so I don't know. I really appreciate the grittier mix that they have on Drawing Black Lines. To me, it almost translates as more honest because they are. I mean, I hate to be like, oh, they're the Christian Rage Against the Machine, but in terms of being subversive and being that band that was willing to cross some lines and try new things and be creative, they kind of are that. And so I want a little bit of that grit in there, a bit of that grime. And that's what I feel like I get with this album. It feels very honest. It holds up to me because they're not referencing anything in the culture. They're not, it's not really like a time capsule album. It's something I could see somebody making today even. It would be probably more polished and a little bit different, but I think it just holds up in general because I mean it was good then, and what was good about it then is still good now. Again, Schwab's lyricism, Steven's bass lines, all that is just it feels like a really cohesive album that you can tell they like Aaron was saying earlier, you know, they had found their sound, or they were finding their sound at this point. And they were really getting somewhere with it. They hadn't quite gotten to the industrial stuff. I mean, they were kind of working into that, but you know, like I said, it holds up to me because I like it for what it is. I would love to hear the remastered as well, but I have a strong feeling that I wouldn't like it as much as I like the original.
That's fair.
When did they get into industrial? I'd be interested to check that out. Is there a specific album where that it starts to feel more industrial?
Well, I would say that Truthless Heroes starts to feel more industrial, but not until really you get into like Omni, their last two albums they put out. I would say they're very industrial. That maybe I'm pinning the wrong term on that, but I think that's accurate.
I think it's fair. I would say it's very, very heavy industrial. Like it's like the thickest that they've ever sounded. And that, I mean, it's a story for another day, but he actually changed his vocal style because at a couple points in his career, he thought he was going to have to quit singing altogether because of vocal issues. So he changed and became like a death growler, basically, like way far into their career, which is wild. But
wow,
they do have, again, more things for another time. But they do have an album that kind of borders on new wave that I hated when it came out and have grown to since love. It's called Rival Factions.
Okay.
So that's one. I think I mentioned this the last time we talked as well. If you listen, you know, anybody listens to this album and is interested in Project but doesn't quite feel the vibe of this, try that one for a whole different flavor of the same band.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I also think I agree with your assessment about Truthless Heroes, and kind of I think the band would agree with what you're saying about it being not your project. I don't even know if they necessarily are that affectionate about it, and the whole it was such a traumatic experience, the whole big label thing for them. But you'll have to have us back whenever you get to that in the anniversaries, and we can
for sure. There's a lot to unpack there. Yeah.
We'll do our yearly Project 86 album.
There you go. We'll get through them all. Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, let's move on then. And we've already mentioned a number of tracks, but what are some of your favorite tracks off this album?
Yeah, my favorite track on this one is Stein's theme.
Hmm.
It's first of all, it's such a great opener, and again, the bass work stands out so much on it, but the lyricism really stands out on it too. It's just
Hmm.
it's a solid song, and it's a great way to start the album. It's just it's very thrashy. I mean, it comes out of nowhere and hits you hard. And the I love the instrumental progression of that song. It kind of takes you on a ride.
Yeah, those first 30 seconds are almost jarring. Like
Mhm.
Yeah,
it's a super unique way to start an album. Like it's not trying to be like, hey, this is going to be a happy fun time. Like it feels like a monster. And I don't know if it's Frankenstein, if that's the reference that he's making, but like it feels like here's something monstrous. Let's go. And that's kind of the sense I get. And I could be way off, but that's kind of how I feel about it. When I first heard it, I was like, whoa, this is a statement that they're making. So yeah.
I like that. I think that's a good assessment of the track. That's definitely one of the ones that has really stood the test of time. You know, again, like for me personally, but and then also for the band and for the fan base. It's like Science theme. It almost, I might even say that song. Well, there's the Spy Hunter. I was gonna say I might say that's like the defining project song, if not for the existence of the Spy Hunter. Uh, so
Number two ain't bad.
yeah. No, but to your point, I think that's a great opener as well. I'm a big fan of the song Chapter 2,
Hmm.
and
yeah,
every time I hear it, I think, man, this would be a great album opener. But then I remember that Stein's theme exists, and I'm like, oh yeah, never mind.
yeah.
They made the right call.
Since I feel like with Chapter Two, it is really derivative of their self-titled album. So if
Mhm.
they'd started with that, it might lead you to think like, oh, this is going to be the same kind of thing, you
Hmm.
know?
Which is ironic because it's called Chapter 2 and it's their second album. So if they had let it off and with that and it sounds the most like the first album, you'd be like, oh man, it's just going to be the same thing again. So that was Chapter
Yeah,
1. Here's Chapter 2. There's some more of that.
yeah,
I still love it, but yeah, that's funny.
yeah. No, it's a great song. I enjoy that one too a lot.
Yeah. So the second track then is One Arm Man and parentheses play on. I think that was the lead single. Is that accurate? I thought I saw a video for
Yeah.
it. So what do you guys think about that one? Is the kind of a, you go out of this great, obviously the opening track is a killer one that everybody's on board with, and then they go into that as kind of the lead single. What are you guys' thoughts on that album or that song?
Yeah, I also do really, really enjoy this song. It's definitely top tier on this album. And I think it's one of the top tier project songs as well. It definitely feels like they were challenged to write a radio playable song
Hmm.
that was still, capture their essence. And I think it really does that.
Hmm.
Yeah, it was definitely the first song I heard from the album that that ever got any play on the radio station that I tuned into, which they were just kind of like an after show. Like it was like a late night Friday night show where they got to play hardcore Christian music.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, One Armed Man was definitely the lead off for this album. And yeah, I mean, it's got some great melody to it. I really like the guitar work on that one. And yeah, I mean, the visual imagery of the song, of course, is zombies and all of this, and it really lends itself well to what they're doing. They kind of had a little stint there where they were kind of like monster metal, and
Yeah.
I feel like this is one of those tracks that that really captured that essence well. And I think it was honestly a good track that competed with some of the like the secular music that was getting the radio play at the time. I think if it had the backing behind it at the time that it was released, I think it would have really done well.
Hmm.
I agree. I think you made a really interesting point. I don't consider this album to be terribly radio friendly, but I do think that One Arm Man was probably the most radio friendly song, and yet, or at least definitely in the top tier on the album, and yet it doesn't sound out of place. There are definitely bands that
Hmm.
you hear where you're like, oh, I can tell that's the single because it doesn't really fit the album very well. It does. I don't feel that way about this song, and yet I would almost
Yeah,
certainly agree if you handed me this album and said, hey, which song are we sending to radio? I would probably tell you One Arm Man.
Yeah.
yeah,
I had to look it up because it felt like it fit. I mean, I had to look up. I was like, what was there a single off this? Because like
Hmm.
it in the streaming platform, it didn't switch to video for me for any of them, and I was like, this all feels like a pretty cohesive unit. So like, it didn't, none of those felt like oh yeah, this is clearly the radio one. So I had to look it up and try and figure it out. So yeah.
Project's music videos are few and far between, especially early in their career. They really didn't make a lot of them.
Which is interesting because, they were on BEC, which is the bigger of the, technically the bigger of the Tooth and Nail things. And then obviously the switch to Atlantic. So that is interesting to not get a ton of music videos out of them.
That may have been one of their big beefs with Atlantic. I don't know.
Yeah.
Next episode. We'll
Yep.
The Project Atlantic beef.
Too many breadcrumbs. Yeah.
Aaron, what are other favorite songs for you?
I'm a big fan. So I think, in my opinion, the album has a little dip kind of in the middle, and then it picks back up again. Towards the end, like I said, I love Chapter 2. I love the song after that. It's called Open Hand. I think it's got like probably maybe the best like groove, I might say, in the album. It just drives really well.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of PS and of Chimes, kind of for the reason that I mentioned earlier. I find them both very unsettling, and I think if you can do that as a band, to your listeners, it's an interesting trait to have. Like Chimes is literally a song about like being tempted, and basically it's basically like a theme song of hell. Is pretty much what Chimes is. It's all about this temptation and whatnot, and I find it like legitimately haunting, and that's an impressive thing to be able to accomplish.
Yeah, I remember Chimes being brought up by some of the metalhead kids that I hung out with. They weren't into Christian metal, but when I brought up Project 86, they were like, "Oh yeah, Chimes." I think it was on like the Blair Witch soundtrack or something like that, and so like they were all into it. Like, "Oh yeah, we love that song." And I was like, "That's not one of my favorite ones, but that is them." So no, I can see why people do like that song. Melodically, it's fantastic. I would say even instrumentally, it's pretty fantastic. But it is very unsettling, and that's it's one of my least favorites on the album. But I think I appreciate it more as I'm older now, because I want to be clear too. Y'all are a little bit older than I am, I believe, and so when I heard this, I was 14. So it wasn't that the middle part of the album, like the whole middle part of the album, is just not really my thing. Starting with Chimes, but yeah, then like I said, the older I get, some of it I started to really appreciate a lot more. That being one of them.
Yeah, I agree. It's like it's one I'm not going to those particular tracks like to rock out to, but the atmosphere of them really stands out. Like if I want to move, I'm gonna go to Up in Hand. I might go to like Set Me Up, which kind of has almost like a hardcore punk kind of feel to me. And then there's a couple of songs, and I think this is one of the testaments of the strength of this album, is that they actually do shift in and out of a few different sounds, or put some surprises on there. Like the ninth track is called Star, and it's very slow. I'm not going to say it's like overly interesting, if I'm being honest, but it's different because if I remember correctly, that's the first time that Randy sings on a Project album. I'm positive that's not Andrew Schwab's voice.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
And Randy has a great singing voice, and that's something that they would explore in later albums much more to a really good effect of kind of juxtaposing him against Schwab's his shouting voice. But this was kind of his debut there, and I think that was a cool experiment to throw on there. Let's just kind of give him a moment to shine in the middle of all, kind of the raucous dissonance that they have going on.
Yeah, no, Star is one of my favorites from the album as well. It just again, it's melodically, it's really, really good. And I do like hearing Randy's voice on there. It's almost like if they were doing a concert, it'd be that song to give the lead singer a break. But a lot of times those end up being like the really good songs. So yeah, I do feel like this whole album, like as you go through the tracks and if you listen to it straight through, it really does kind of take you on a journey, and I appreciate that about it.
Since we're on tracks, I have to ask this question. How often, if you're listening to this album, or even just back in the day listening to it, did you listen all the way through 23?
I knew that's the question you were going to ask. I knew it. Very rarely. So like I don't know. I feel like there was this whole thing where it was like almost a challenge
Yeah.
with some of these bands to be like, what's the most dissonant, terrible way we can end an album?
Yep.
You know, because like, I mean, I'll point out too, from our previous podcast, I don't think I said this when we were talking about POD's Fundamental Elements of the Southtown, but the end of Outcast, I can't stand it.
Yep.
What a great song. Fantastic song. But my goodness, once it starts with all the scrambled everything, I can't do it. My brain hurts.
Yep.
Okay, guys, I feel a lot better because I will say, like, I listened to this and I was much less familiar, and I got to that and I'm like halfway through it and I'm like, this is rough. Like, I'm not enjoying this, and I love an epic closer. Like, I'm all about the epic closer, and it's a bummer to me because I think One Hand would actually be a really great way to close the album out.
Yeah.
It's a little short, but it ends the album in a much more like I love the groove of that song. So I was like halfway through and I'm like, I feel hurt by this song. I feel a little better now.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's 23
awful.
is almost 13 minutes long, and it increasingly just devolves into noise. The way that I've put it in the past is that there's a good song in there, but they bury it and then they just go way off the deep end. And so like you can find a good song at the beginning of 23 and then but you can't. To your point, I feel like it's an endurance test to make it all the way through that track. Plus, it makes the whole album nearly an hour long, and personally, I think that more like 45-ish minutes is a sweet spot. So if you trim this track out, then you're probably going to hit that sweet spot really well. But the only thing I liked about 23, and maybe this is just me thinking certain things were really clever as a teenager, was that it supposedly, I always assumed it was called that because it was the 23rd song that they'd released, because their first album has 10 tracks, and then there was one B-side. And so this would be track 12 on their second album. I don't know if that's actually why they called it that, but I always assumed as a child.
That's a good guess as a child. Yeah. Holy cow. I would have never put that together.
Yeah. Oh, I was that kind of nerd that was looking for those.
I thought they were fans of Michael Jordan. I was very confused.
They didn't do him a good service by giving him that song if they were. It's the only song I genuinely don't like on the album.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. My theory on it is because, look, Project 86 had a serious case of sticking to the moniosis. They love to just push back against producers and against studios. I have a feeling they're like, hey, we need to fill this time to complete the album. And I feel like they were like, okay, yeah, gotcha. And then they just put the worst thing that they could on tape, and that's what they ended up with. That's my theory, and I'm sticking to it.
That's pretty funny.
They said, you want a song? Here's a song.
Yeah. That's my challenge to your listeners. This is take the 23 challenge and listen to all 13 minutes of it without turning it down or off.
I might do that as maybe I'll do that as a Patreon exclusive. Is I'll live stream, like I'll do a listen through, and I'll just comment the entire time and see.
There you go.
You can listen to 13 minutes of Caleb struggling to get through that song. I feel so much better, guys. I was like, in general, this isn't my sort of thing in general, but then I got to that and I was like, wow, that is what I kept on saying. So, oh man, I feel so much better. You brought up Randy, and I do like kind of his vocal contrast. Did they go on to use him again? I'm fairly uneducated when it comes to. Did they go on to use him more on vocals, like as kind of like a balance? Because I feel like it's not the nu metal thing that you would get with a lot of bands where it's like, the nu metal formula where they, it's kind of growly and then they do the very, the chorus is always the clean vocals. But he just adds a nice little, like it's kind of in the background. It doesn't get pushed way to the front. Did they use him more, or is this kind of like something that they played with? Okay. And was that something that was on their first album at all?
I don't
think so.
It being there.
Okay.
No. My recollection is that Star is really like his vocal debut, at least in a way that you can actually truly tell that it's somebody else, and they're standing out. But even starting with Truthless Heroes, I'm looking through the track listing right now and I can see a handful of songs where his vocals are what I'm thinking of. And then when you
Hmm.
get to songs to burn your bridges by, there's a lot more of it.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I mean, they incorporated him in a way that I found very effective because,
Yeah.
even if Schwab's vocal style is your thing, full album of it after full album of it with
Yeah.
no break, that would become tiring, I feel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing that I found is I love the site setlist.com. It's just a great little
Hmm.
website, and I love seeing what bands play live. And this does have in their history on setlist.com. Now, it may not include everything they've ever done. They've played more songs from this album than any of their other albums. So
Hmm.
that's just, kind of out there. And part of that is longevity, right? Because they're still around doing stuff. So, there's just an opportunity they've had 20 years to play these as with an opportunity, or 25 years to play these. But it was funny. The songs that they play the most live are Stein's Theme, One Armed Man, P.S., Chimes, Sad Machines, Chapter 2,
Yeah.
and One Hand. So those are the songs that have clearly stuck with them. Now, some of them must start to dip down. They've played almost every song on here at one point live, and they have played
Yeah.
23 once live, is what it
Oh,
looks
man.
like. So,
Mm.
but there's a couple of them that were only played once, but those songs also all have multiple plays throughout their history. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
It endures.
Sad Machines is another good one that I like a lot.
Okay. And that's right in the middle where you said you struggled a little with some of the middle here, but that's track 8. I
Yeah.
mean, so it's kind of right in the middle there still. So
Yeah, I mean,
it's a nice
yeah.
little pick me up.
not to dwell, for me personally, Toast to My Former Self, Sad Machines, and Star is a dip compared
Okay.
to what came before and then the couple songs after.
It's
But
interesting. You guys flip. So it's
Yeah.
interesting. Like you guys both have like things you like, but it's kind of different spots in the album. That's cool.
there you go.
Last question that we always end with is, 25 years later, this is a band that's still around. It's obviously a band that has meant something to you guys. Why would you say, hey, go back and check this out? And I know sometimes you're repeating yourself a little. These aren't the best questions in the world for a podcast, but why is the reason you'd go tell somebody to go check this album out?
I would say, first of all, again, if you are interested in the band, this is a great place to start. And like Aaron said, if this isn't the one for you, then there's other albums that might be a good way to go as well. But there's a reason that they played these songs more at their shows than any other album. It just really captures the essence of the band,
Hmm.
to me, it captures the essence of uh, what was happening in music at the time. People really experimenting and trying different stuff with new metal, kind of branching out into some different genres and doing some different things. I think this is really good. Like I said, it's not really so much a time capsule for the band, but maybe for the sound of the time, I think it's a pretty decent time capsule. But they were finding their footing as a band with this album, and I think they honestly landed pretty well with it there. And it was influential, I think, for a lot of other artists that were coming out at the time. And it really really lends itself to a good listen. I come back to it all the time.
Hmm.
I've got several of these songs on a lot of my playlists, and every time I hear them, man, it puts a smile on my face. It doesn't just take me back, but I love sonically what they were doing at the time. It was really good.
Aaron, how about for you?
Man, I think most of my notes would pretty much be the same. Yeah, I mean, a lot of this stuff there is like a sentimental, nostalgic attachment to it. So it's hard to say like if you were just discovering this band right now, what you would think, especially with the 20 some years of music that have happened since then. But I feel like it still holds up pretty well. There's sonically things that they're doing there that I haven't really heard too many other bands do, at least in what I've been exposed to. And like Robert mentioned, there's they were doing something unique and challenging a lot of things that kind of timelessly need to be challenged, especially within, like the Christian world, as it were. Like there's a lot of stuff that they sing about that is still very relevant and would still feel very fresh if you start investigating the lyrics. And so yeah, if we haven't sold you in the last hour or so of talking about it, I don't have too much more.
And you get a free pass. You don't have to listen to 23. You can just do 11 songs and
Yeah.
be done. And, maybe we'll even say that as a caveat. If you want to go back and check this out later, just know it's not actually an hour. It's only about 45 minutes.
I found out, I looked up while you guys were talking, that one show where they played 23, and it turns out what it was in 2021, they did a full album playthrough of this album. It was
That seems
cool.
about right. Yeah.
Yeah. So start to finish, every bit of it they played on that it was a live stream. It was January 2021, so it was during lockdown or during the
Cool.
pandemic. So it probably wasn't it says at a private venue in Nashville. So it probably wasn't, actually people there. So that's interesting.
I wonder if
I'm
you
gonna
can
have to
still
look up that
find
live
that.
stream.
Yeah, see if you can still
Yeah.
find that online. That'd be an interesting experience.
Yeah, a little piece of project nerdery to check out.
That's interesting. Well, and by that point, am I correct in assuming that Andrew's the only one left from the core group at that point in 2021? Okay.
Within a span of the rest of the band was all together for, I don't know, 4-ish more albums,
Okay.
and then they kind of started trickling off, and he kind of rebuilt a new band after that.
Yep. It makes perfect sense. Like, I know it's great when bands can stick around, and like somebody mentioned this week on Twitter that Stryper still has like 3 of their 4 main members. And I was like, wow, that's really impressive. But like, I totally get it. Like, touring and this sort of relationship with people it's a lot. Like,
Yeah.
I totally understand why bands just eventually say, that's enough. I'm out of here. And, like even leaving on good terms. So I totally get it.
Yeah.
How could I be? How could I be? How could
Well, that's it. That's our breakdown of Drawing Black Lines by Project 86, again released March 21st, 2000. So it is celebrating a 25-year anniversary. Rob and Aaron, I know you both have online presence. So let's tell us where we can find you. Rob, we'll go with you first. Tell us kind of where we can find you online.
Pretty much only on Twitter. I have a Facebook, but that's just for family and friends and stuff. So on Twitter, I love to connect. I love to talk to people, chat about music, especially. But I'm there at Pearls for Swine Guy, the number 4.
That's right. I had to remember that because it's been so long since you kind of switched your profile picture.
Yeah.
And I looked it up today and I was like, oh, that's right. This is how I met Rob, was as Pearls for Swine Guy.
Yeah.
And I had totally forgotten, which is pretty funny. And then Aaron, you're online and not only online, but you also have a podcast of your own. So tell us about that podcast and where people can find you and find that podcast.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's how we ended up getting connected. As somewhere along the line, one of my the accounts that I mostly run for that show followed you. But yeah, I do a mostly rock artist interview at this point. We've kind of evolved that direction. Podcast called the Itch Rock Podcast. The Itch is the name of a radio show that a couple friends and I started in college. And so we've had people that we've talked about in this episode on there. We actually released an interview with Sonny from POD recently, and that was really a fantastic one for me, like a wish list. But
That's
yeah,
awesome.
that's what we're up to. Yeah, we have new episodes every week. Our handles, our website, as well as our Facebook and Instagram handles are all Itch Rocks, ITCHROCKS. And that's where you can reach me because I do a pretty good chunk of the handling of our social media. And, if you reach out to us, we're pretty interactive. We like building that community as much as we can.
It's awesome. Yeah, it's funny. I emailed your show, and I always just assume you're going to read it. And I'm like, if
Yeah.
these other guys want to pick up the email, great.
Yeah.
This is the way I know how to get a hold of you. So here you go.
Yeah, we respond to everything, and it's 80% of the time it's me. So
It's Aaron and other guys.
yeah, that's how I sign off whenever I'm pitching to people to try to get guests. It's like they're in parentheses because you're probably interacting with me.
That's funny. Well, awesome. Guys, I really appreciate it. I know we had to reschedule a couple times just because life is busy. So I really appreciate you guys taking time. I know how important this album is to so many people who were in this scene. And so I was super excited to talk about it. And, that's kind of what I'm going for on this show is like, even if it's not something I'm totally in love with, or is it, I missed Project 86 entirely when they were kind of, blowing up back in those early 2000s. That's what I want the show to be, is people just to get a chance to come on here and talk about it, honestly about what they like and why they're excited about it. And so I really, really appreciate you guys taking the time to talk to me about this album. And yeah, thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to come on, and we can definitely do a yearly project anniversary episode if you so desire.
We're on the schedule at this point, which is pretty funny to me. But yeah, there you go. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Album Anniversary Podcast. I wanted to say thanks again to Rob and Aaron for joining me, taking time out of their schedule to talk about this album. It was great to have them on the show. Great to talk about it. It's obviously an album that means a lot to a lot of people, so I was so excited to have them on the show. Let us know what you thought. What did we get right? What did we get wrong? What are your favorites from this album? You can find me on Twitter. You can also find me on Instagram. You can find me on Blue Sky. I'm there as well. You can also email the show at killedthespypodcast@gmail.com. No spaces in that, no underscores, just Caleb the Spy Podcast. There's an S at the end of that at gmail.com. I'm also on Patreon. I've started that. It's totally free. Just trying to find another space. Like I said in this show, I think I might do that. I might listen to all of 23 and just do a blind react to it as I listen to it. See if, see what it sounds like. So I'm doing little Patreon things like that. Just a spot, social media is fickle and people are leaving and coming and going. And so it's a place to kind of have that people can always find the show. They can always find me. They can always reach out. So that's what I'm doing it for. It's totally free. I have just a free tier. All you got to do is if you already have a Patreon account, you just have to find it. It's not Caleb the Spy. That's the one place I'm not there. I am the Album Anniversary Podcast is the way to find me on Patreon. Please subscribe and share the podcast. If you're so inclined, please leave a rating or a review. I have heard it is an effective way to spread the word about podcasts. If you enjoy this show, you might also enjoy the other show I do with my friend Scott. It's called I Survived Youth Group in the 90s. It's not just a podcast where we reminisce about our youth and our youth group experience, but we're going back. We're interviewing fellow 90s youth group kids and some from the 2000s, and we just want to hear where they're at now, how that youth group experience has impacted their life, whether they've left the faith entirely or they're still at the church they were raised at. We want to hear their story, hear about their life and how that youth group experience has impacted them. If I don't fill up the show with all Project 86 music, the music I do use at the beginning and the end of the show is often Sing It Out at Street Level by Pagan the Rejected. Again, I'm recording this before I edit, so, it might be that song, it might be other things, but if there is unique ska music at the beginning of the show, it is Sing It Out at Street Level by Pagan the Rejected. Thanks again, and we will talk to you soon.
So take hold of this thing, no other way. You will find me God. Surround us, be there to protect us. I'll find my way back up. Surround us, be there to protect us.
Yeah.
Look up a little bit of research.
My kids decided to roll a ball across the kitchen. I think Zoom probably muffled it out, but it was like ding, 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 ding. Like, I'm recording on Audacity, and it was like ding, 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 ding. And I was like, what the heck?
I didn't hear anything, so
Yeah, Zoom covers it, and Audacity picks it up. It's pretty funny.
I'm just waiting for I'm at my folks' house, and
The dog's
they're
only
not
going to
home
handle
yet.
take so much.
I'm waiting. Well, I'm waiting for the dog to bark whenever they get home because
Oh,
he always will. But it's probably far enough away that it won't pick up. Anyway, let me go back to the question at hand here.
and I can ask it again too, right
I
here.
think I'm good. Yeah.
One arm pig, or gosh, one arm pig. Let me start over. Sheepers. Throw that in the outtakes as I fumble through this.